If someone's doing me harm now, that is enough to leave. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And that is something that I wish I could just shout into the void.
Many of our partners who have narcissistic traits often struggle with ADHD. Is there a connection between ADHD and narcissism? To answer that question, Sheila Henson joins me to talk about the overlap of these two disorders. I'm so excited today to have Sheila Henson on. I found you, Sheila, on TikTok, and that's how I become first aware of your content. And you were talking about ADHD and autism, and of course it got my interest because I'm an autistic person. But I also was very aware that in that toxic relationship that my narcissistic ex often complained he had ADHD. And I saw, as a psychologist, I recognized symptoms of it, but I ended up wondering, though, how these arenas, narcissism and ADHD and ADHD, I know I always say that wrong, how they kind of like overlap or show up together. So why don't you tell us, first of all, a little bit about yourself, how you got interested in this, and then we can jump into these topics.
Sure. I'm an ADHD coach and neurodiversity educator. And the thing about working with ADHD is that you do end up working with autism, bipolar, lots of trauma and personality disorders. So I have had over 20 years of experience in the field doing things like this. So lots of exposure to neurodiversity, which I absolutely love. I'm just fascinated by brains and nervous systems and always have been. And part of that is growing up in a very neurodivergent family. I have like a very large, close-knit family. There's a lot of ADHD, there's autism, there's bipolar, there's schizophrenia, there's probably some personality disorders in it. So that was something that from birth, I feel like I was kind of born into. Like I was kind of born into the field, and especially being the oldest of like 16 cousins that all have these things. And then I have ADHD, and because I was more of the shut up and don't cause problems ADHD, or even though everything was messy, I had all of the more inattentive symptoms when I was younger. I didn't realize it was me, so I was the helper. And then later I realized, oh wait, I need help too. I think that's a very common story. So I got into doing that, and I am especially fascinated by personality disorders because of the stigma. And the majority of my career has been working with people who in some way or another cause harm through their behavior. And a lot of those people are autistic, and a lot of them are ADHD, and a lot of them have personality disorders. And because I was in crisis prevention and things like that, I have a sort of interesting take in that I think a lot of people are in a very important lane of helping victims of abuse. And my lane is more helping the abusers to not abuse. And regardless of what the sort of origin of why those abusive behaviors are happening. So yeah, I'm really fascinated by all of this stuff.
That's interesting. So identify, first of all, for those who are maybe like, I've heard of ADHD, but I'm not exactly for sure. And I also know that the field has changed a lot. So I know that I'm out of date, for example. Kind of what's the current state? Like, what are we calling what? There used to be ADHD with hyperactivity, and then there used to be and then one that's more distractible. Is that still like two separate categories, or just kind of explain what this is?
Yeah, sure. So the thing about neurodiversity right now is that we're sort of in like this revolution. It's kind of the Wild West. And so depending on who you're talking to, they're going to be using different terminology and have a different definition, right? So ADHD in one lane is a disorder in the DSM, and there are 3 presentations: inattentive presentation, hyperactive presentation, and combined presentation in the US. So you can have I have every single one of those symptoms. I check them all. I feel proud of that. But some people are only going to be on the more inattentive side, having trouble focusing, maybe zoning out a lot, versus the hyperactivity side is maybe blurting things out, can't stop moving, things like that. And some people vacillate between the two. And we call them presentations, not types, because you can change. Like I said, when I was younger and I had maybe less self-confidence and I maybe was less healthy in a lot of ways, I had a much more inattentive presentation. And once I hit puberty and figured certain things out, that hyperactivity really came in. And I think I present a lot more hyperactive now.
Do you think that ADHD ever coexists with other disorders? I know some people think things are caused by, and I get really edgy because rarely it's causal, but help us understand maybe how narcissism and ADHD might be co-occurring, or how even they would show up.
So actually, if you have ADHD, you're much more likely to have a lot of different things statistically. So if you're ADHD, you're more likely to be autistic. If you're ADHD, you're more likely to have dyslexia. You're more likely to have dyscalculia. and more likely to have a personality disorder. And I think that the reason is the problem with all of this research is that it's new and it's only in the last, I don't know, decade or something that like ADHDers are researching ADHD, autistics are researching autism, et cetera. And so a lot of the research that we have, it's amazing, it's great, I'm glad we have it. I definitely pay a lot of attention to it. And I take everything with a grain of salt. Like these people were looking at this as like a problem to be solved. Like how are these brains and nervous systems annoying us? How are they sucking at capitalism? How can we fix people? And so everything I say, I'm like, as far as we know right now, in my understanding, blah, 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 right? Because we really don't know. But what it looks like, the research shows that both ADHD and autism are genetic to a high degree. There are other factors that are going to affect the presentation of it, but highly, highly hereditary. So the cause of autism and ADHD, it's genetics, and environmental factors are going to affect our genetic presentation. So there's that. And with ADHD and autism, we have more sensitive nervous systems. So trauma is not an experience, right? Trauma is how the experience changes our body and brain. Trauma is a physical change in our brain and nervous system, right? ADHDers and autistics are shown to be more susceptible to trauma in that way. Personality disorders, all of them, as far as I know, are born of trauma, right? And so it stands to reason, in my mind, that if you're ADHD or autistic, you will be more likely to be BPD, NPD, etc. That makes sense. We don't know that for sure. We don't know exactly how there's no blood test for any of this. You can't go back and look at somebody's entire life story because we're bad self-reporters, right? Like I remember going to therapy and being like, no, I don't have trauma. And then my therapist just looking at me horrified while I told her my childhood stories. Like I definitely have trauma. And a lot of trauma responses are maladaptive and can harm people. I think that there's a genetic component to us having a lot of co-occurring conditions with ADHD, but I think that also just that sensitivity that we have is going to make us more likely to have mental illnesses or things that can cause problems because of that.
Well, interestingly enough, we're still out on the cluster B, the development of cluster B as well. And I was listening to a fascinating interview this morning of a neuroscientist on the Diary of CEO with Stephen Bartlett. And I didn't like everything she had to say. I was struggling with some of it. But one of the things she said is that there's genetics and then there's epigenetics. And epigenetics is sort of the interaction between our wiring and our environment. Because there are people out there, and I just recently had them on the podcast, Dr. Peter Salerno is one of them, that says this is primarily, I'm thinking cluster B, primarily genetic. And then you'll have other people who say, no, I really think it's trauma-based. I think it's both. But it is interesting because my thought was why they're co-occurring, and this is just me theorizing off the top of my head, is that, for example, cluster Bs, a lot of them struggle with novelty seeking. Well, ADHD struggles with novelty seeking. There's impulse control problems with cluster B. There's impulse control problems with ADHD. So to me, some of this is just overlapping symptomology that makes it easier to say both is co-occurring because probably the pathways that control all of that are very similar or maybe in the exact same spots. But cluster B has to do with the way we relate to each other, whereas ADHD has to do with executive functioning issues, like how we relate to the world.
I see it a little bit differently, but I don't disagree with you. If you look through the DSM, you put all of the different symptoms of everything. There's so much overlap with everything that it's almost comical, right? Like,
well, in fact, if you're as a psychologist, you have to learn all the differential diagnoses.
Yeah.
Like, for example, let's just take another simple one. It's excess energy. Somebody comes into the room with excess energy. Could be a mania. It could be anxiety. It could be ADHD. It could be that they're on some kind of a substance. You know what I'm saying? And you and I could even speculate. Maybe they had a brain injury recently.
Right.
So there's all these things that you have to literally like cross off and rule out as you're sitting with the person.
Yeah. And so like the way that I start to see it, and I try to dabble in a little bit of neuroscience and a little bit, I'm getting into doing a somatic therapy training, and that's helping me understand the nervous system a little bit better. And I feel like ADHD is like this, well, if I really want to understand ADHD, I have to understand everything that's ever happened, right? So just understanding even just like parts of the brain, and I understand, okay, the frontal lobe, our executive functioning. We can see executive functioning can come from trauma, it can come from ADHD, it can come from autism, it can come from certain executive functions specifically, right? Like flexible thinking for autism and impulsivity for ADHD or whatever. But that's all it's just that part of the brain, right? So it could be brain damage. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is horrendously ignored. This is a prevalent, doctors have been saying for so long, it's okay to have a couple glasses of wine while you're pregnant, da, da, da. We know now it absolutely is not, but no one will call it out as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
Yeah, in fact, I saw your video on that recently and like, oh man, are you stepping into hot territory there?
I get so, because the more that I look into it, the more that I'm like, this mirrors ADHD and autism. Because I work with so many people that are like, I kind of fit ADHD, I kind of fit autism. It must be that it's the crossover and they cancel each other out, which does happen. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it also absolutely could be fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And how would you know? And everyone thinks, oh, well, I don't have the facial features. Like 10% of people have the facial features anyway. So, but nobody wants to talk about that, right?
Because it's a dirty little secret. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there are also other things that we don't know yet. We have not identified.
Absolutely.
You know? And so this idea of trying to smash things into boxes, I just find a problem, right? It's very helpful to, okay, if someone tells me I'm autistic, there are certain things I can say. I could say, well, these medications might be of help to you. These communities might be of help to you. This type of communication might be of help to you. These supports might be of help to you. But I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. And everybody's different. And so the labels are very helpful to an extent. But once we start talking about what we're talking about, of like, what are the causes? Where is this coming from? Why is this happening? I really feel like we have to come outside of the boxes and look more into neurodiversity and all of the different factors that affect our brains and nervous systems, which can be trauma, it can be physical trauma, it can be emotional trauma, it can be our genetics, it can be epigenetics. There is generational trauma is very real. It can be just our experiences, not even a traumatic event, but just living in this like toxic colonial culture. If you look at like a lot of the narcissistic personality disorder issues of like believing that if I'm not on top, then someone else is going to be on top of me and everybody's out to get, like, this is like, that is taught through our culture. We are taught that it's a dog eat dog world. Yeah, what is it? Survival of the fittest. Like, of course you're going to have these people who've taken this inside of them to this extent when that's what we're told and that's what works. We see how many people with narcissistic traits are just succeeding in our society. We're rewarding it. And of course, there's a genetic component. It makes no sense to me to try to put anything into tiny little boxes when we don't even fully understand. Our brains and nervous systems are so far outside of the understanding of current science that, like, yeah, it would just be so, the people that talk about it so certainly, I just think is silly. I never fully trust those people.
To you, that's a warning sign. And that's a really good point that you're making. Here's a common problem I'm seeing, though, and that is ADHD, even autism, and both are things that are not changeable. Yes, you can adapt your behavior, but the way in which you see the world and you handle your energy and your impulsivity, all these kind of executive functioning issues are just going to be issues. But there's becoming popular for some to say that their toxic quality, the things that are abusive are no longer abusive because of the condition. So what do you say to that when you see that? Yeah, you're shaking your head. Yeah, when you see that come in as a problem.
Yeah, I think that I don't care where it comes from that you're doing harm. It's still your responsibility to not do harm. I don't care. My ADHD makes it very difficult for me to be on time. That's going to harm some people. I have some friends, particularly my autistic friends, who are extremely dysregulated by me not being on time. And so we have specific protocols that we use around, like, I give them a half-hour window instead of a specific time because that's something I'm capable of. I know people with ADHD who are not capable of even having that half-hour window. And honestly, I almost recommend they move to a different country that has different ideas about time because, like, there are places where the time is not, I lived in Brazil, it was much easier there so that they aren't doing harm to people, or it can be really difficult. And I don't think you should feel bad. I don't feel bad about who I am because I can't keep time. Like, I have time agnosia. That's part of, like you said, that's just who I am. I've gotten better. And there are multiple things that help improve some of these things that can be harmful. Like when you say, like, oh, we can't change our ADHD and autism. But what I've seen is through having safety, feeling safe in your body and your mind, rigidity diminishes, time agnosia diminishes, blurting diminishes. Like, these traits that can be harmful diminish when we feel safe. And it was very interesting going into this, like, somatic community, because you go into you go to a different branch of wellness or whatever, and you get a different view. And they talk about all of these things as dysregulated nervous system. Oh, if you don't have a dysregulated nervous system, you don't have flexibility. And there are people who will say, well, I'm autistic, so I'll always have trouble with that. And it's like, well, and I have seen that improve in people who feel safe. However, being able to feel safe in our society is such a privilege. Like that's just, I mean, to find therapeutic supports that actually work for you, to have the resources to be able to access those things, to have a living environment, to even just find people who you feel safe around when you are a neurodivergent person, that is a lot of privilege, right? So it's not like, well, just go fix it. It's just not that simple, but there are ways of making it better, as like a side note. But I think that regardless of why you're doing harm to somebody, it's still your responsibility to figure out how to not do harm. And so if someone tells me, oh, I'm abusive because of my ADHD, then I would say, I don't care. I don't care. Like, yeah, you don't need to feel shame. Shame is really a cause of a lot of these harmful behaviors, right? I mean, narcissism is a huge example of that, of like any amount of criticism or the thought that I could be wrong is too painful. And so I have to be a god or else I can't survive. Like that is a shame problem. And we all have a little bit of that. And it is very common. There's ADHDers are more likely to have trouble taking responsibility. And I don't think that that's because we were born like that. I think that's because we were so used to doing things wrong, unintentionally, wrong, doing things that people said, this is not how you're supposed to do it. So we're getting all of these reprimands at a young age over and over and over again. And the only way to feel safe is to lie and to lie to ourselves, because the other option is, well, I might as well just die. And so the only other option we have is like, no, they're all a-holes. And I have to manipulate them because they're all unreasonable. And this is a neurodivergent experience, I think, beyond ADHD, just any kind of divergent. If your brain doesn't work the way that people expect, you're going to have some level of this experience, right? Of like, well, they're all unreasonable, or I'm a useless piece of garbage. If you're a 5-year-old, those are your only options. That you can't go, well, I think that my brain and nervous system doesn't fit into the society in which I was born. And these expectations, even though my parents are really trying hard, I don't think that this is realistic for me. Like you don't have that option. And so that's when we start to develop these protective mechanisms. And a lot of those protective mechanisms are manipulate, lie, cheat. And then if you don't have someone come to you and say, at some point, get to learn the lesson somehow, have the privilege of having somebody see you and teach you this lesson of like, you don't have to do that. This is what you can do instead and still be okay. Then yeah, you're going to turn into a person who lies and cheats and all of that in order to just get your needs met and feel okay and feel safe.
It's interesting because I didn't know I was neurodivergent until I was 57, but I knew something was different. I profoundly knew something was really, really different. There was a fairy tale about swan being born in a duckling family. My coping solution was to become the best fodder possible, to really like try to figure the rules out as best as I could, which makes sense. Autism likes patterns. Figure out the patterns and then comply to the patterns as best as I could. But what I sacrificed in that process was my creativity, and certainly aspects of my identity was stifled because I was trying to fit into the system that wasn't working. I definitely felt like I was a square peg trying to fit into a round hole, and it wasn't working really well. But it is interesting what you're proposing. I know I already hear my audience's worry, and that is, well, if this is just, because here's the thing, when you get into a toxic relationship, you're trying to make sense of what's wrong, and you look for all sorts of answers, and you're also trying to fix it so that it goes better, trying to go back to what it was originally in the beginning to what you got presented with that got shifted. What you didn't know is that you didn't really meet the real person. You met the person that they thought you wanted to meet so that you'd have this relationship, and that you're never going to get back there. And that actually that good person that you met was a manipulation of that person towards you to get you to comply. So what we get stuck on, because I was in a toxic relationship and I did this for a really long time, is trying to fix my partner and figuring out, okay, so if it's trauma, and by the way, my partner had a lot of, if I believe him, and I don't know how much is true and not true, but his mom, I met her, and she indicated that she was not a good mom. So I believe that some of his stories were true, that he came from a really rough home. So I kept thinking if I could provide a safe enough environment, he would become a better person. No, he was not going to become a better person. He had become a person that was just deceptive. The truth to him was optional and actually a privilege. You should know the truth. The truth was a privilege. So I get worried that people hear this and say, it's going to be my job, and if I'm in a partnership with somebody like this, for them to get better. And if I could be a safer person, then I'll see the better person. And is that what you're saying? You're reacting like, no, that's not what I'm saying.
And as a person who's been in actually a few of those relationships, because another reaction to growing up neurodivergent is learning how to fawn and people please and how to fix everybody else. And I might have fallen into that hard. And so I definitely have been in yeah, abusive relationships, one of which was like 3 years long, and definitely that person had narcissistic tendencies. And it was very hard for me to get out of either of those relationships because those people did have, both of those people had very severe trauma. And I thought, yeah, I could fix them and I could provide safety and I could provide comfort. And there would be these little moments where I would see these glimmers of them having accountability or apologizing or whatever, and then they would just go back, right? And so one thing that I think is really important is I think that every single person is capable of healing and doing better in the right environment with the right supports in the right universe, right? I can't provide that to any person, and I can't wait around letting them hurt me to like see if that's going to happen. If someone's doing me harm now, that is enough to leave. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And that is something that I wish I could just shout into the void, is like, even if they have a reason to hurt you, it's still not okay that they're hurting you.
Right.
Because I know people and I will get to know them and I will learn, oh, this is exactly why you're doing this. Your mom did this and this and this and this. That's still, it's still your responsibility. I don't care if it's your ADHD. I don't care if it's your autism. I don't care if it's your trauma. I don't care if it's your genetics. If you're doing me harm, and you're not showing me like true accountability and progress toward, you're like, I'm going to therapy every week, every time this happens, and I'm seeing this change over time for these things. If you're doing me real harm, then I gotta go, like, period. I wish you the best. I hope that you go and get healing, but I can't do that. Who do I think I am? And I think that was some of it. I thought I had this power. And the thing is, I can work with my clients and I can make progress with them, because they're already coming to seek that out and they're paying me for it. And that is a different situation. And I'm not going to be the only support. They're going to have therapists. We talk about their friends and family and how they can incorporate those supports. But I, as a romantic partner to someone or a friend to someone, you cannot provide what they need to heal, period. Like, that is not your job. That is not your place. And if they are actively harming you, you are not the person to heal them. If someone is actively harming you, you are not the person to heal them. They need to go find somebody else. And that's the same thing if I will work with people who are racist or homophobic. I'm white and straight presenting. So they're not actively harming me. So I can do the work to heal them. No one that they are actively harming should be expected to go heal them. Because people can heal, right? And anyone, if you are in a relationship and someone is actively harming you and you want them to get healed, they need to go get healed. You're not going to be the one to heal them.
That's such a powerful point. I'm really glad you're saying that. I think too many of us see ourselves as both the abused but the solution. And that combination is a very dangerous combination, especially for the psychology of the one being abused, because then you betray yourself over and over again when you do that. My motto lately has been, I need to stop prioritizing connection over personal safety. And that I really need to kind of strongly look at that. I think what we fail to see is that unmet needs are so profound, a wanting to belong, that we're willing to continue to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of the relationship, thinking somehow they're going to see that as love and it's going to make them different. No, it's not. Until they have their own crisis of whatever type, and some individuals will never get to that place, then things are not going to change.
Yeah. And we have to remember too, as someone who is in this position, I'm sorry to say this, but we're also the problem. Like, I'm looking for something. I'm trying to heal myself through healing them. I'm trying to solve my problems through solving theirs. I'm avoiding my problems by trying to solve theirs. By staying in this, and now there are situations where you're staying in a relationship for your life. That's a different situation,
exactly.
right?
Or because you're trapped.
Yeah, you're trapped for safety, physical
safety. Financial, for lots of reasons.
Yeah, but a lot of the reasons we got into those situations, and a lot of us that could get out of the situations and aren't, we really have to look at ourselves and say, what am I getting from this? What am I avoiding seeing in myself? What am I avoiding healing? And why? Why do I think that I deserve this? Why am I trying to be a martyr? What is that? Why is that happening? And I think for me, I could trace it back very clearly to childhood trauma. And once that connection was made and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm trying to heal this through saving you. And I'm not magic. I can't do that. And so now and then we go, oh, well, they're the problem. And it's like, yeah, they're a problem, but we're part of the problem. A relationship takes two people.
That's such a hard point. I know a lot of people will hear that it's victim blaming, but I know that you're exactly right. And I can tell you, Sheila, what was holding me, it was my autism. My difficulty in making relationships, to find a home in somebody, solved my problem with interacting with the world. I wasn't
Yeah.
lonely. If I had a
Yep.
relationship, I wasn't lonely. So I wanted to hide inside of this relationship because I don't know my story, but I had been widowed a year before I met him. So, and that other earlier relationship was the first time I had ever felt I had found home. So I wanted it back, and I was really searching fast and furious to find it. This has been, I could tell you and I could just, man, we could talk for a very long time. We have so many different angles that I know are being left undone. But I'd love to jump over to the podcast extra and talk about how do you tease out when this is just ADHD that's making life rough and when it's ADHD and a personality disorder or personality traits that's making life rough. So we're going to jump over and do that interview next, but tell us how to find you online.
You can find me online on my website, SheilaHenson.com. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube as @ADHD Coach Sheila. And you can find me in Portland, Oregon, running around.
Great. Thank you so much for this, Sheila. This is really fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. Or you can learn more about me and my resources, such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club at KerryMcAvoyPhD.com. And I'll see you back here next week.